Decades of personal finance has been built on a handful of core rules that feel solid and dependable. Rules like these are often treated as timeless, but when the world they were designed for changes, it becomes reasonable to ask whether the guidance still fits. One of the most familiar examples is the emergency fund, and whether the old wisdom still holds up in a modern economy. Many people save, budget, and try to do everything right, yet still feel one unexpected bill away from real trouble. If that sounds familiar, it is not unusual. There is a quiet anxiety many households share, a sense that the financial ground beneath them feels less stable than it once did, even with careful planning. The rule most people have heard is simple and widely repeated. Keep 3 to 6 months of expenses in a safe, easy-to-access account. It sounds responsible, and for a long time it was a useful benchmark. That benchmark, however, was shaped by a very different economic reality than the one most households face today. If that 3 to 6 month goal feels harder to reach, or if it feels like it might not be enough, that is not a personal failure. It is a signal that the economic landscape has shifted in ways that change the risks people have to manage. The advice itself has not fully kept pace with the environment. Over the past several decades, income growth for typical households has slowed significantly. When income growth stalls, the ability to save is squeezed even for people who are careful and consistent. As a result, building a meaningful financial buffer becomes more difficult than it once was. At the same time, the experience of job loss has changed. Finding new work often takes longer than it used to, and extended periods without stable income are more common. What was once a short disruption can now stretch into a long and uncertain transition. The economy that produced the 3 to 6 month rule was one with more predictable paychecks, more temporary layoffs, and lower, more manageable costs for major necessities like healthcare. Today's economy looks different, with more variable income, higher fixed costs, and longer recovery periods after setbacks. Rules built for the old system don't always translate cleanly into the new one. An emergency fund is not an investment, and it's not meant to grow wealth. Its role is simpler than that, to buy time and preserve options when something goes wrong. To do that effectively, it has to be sized for the kinds of financial shocks people actually face now, not the ones they faced decades ago. Those risks tend to fall into a few broad categories. Income is less stable, healthcare costs can arrive suddenly and unpredictably, housing costs are high and inflexible, and debt payments create fixed obligations that don't disappear when income drops. Taken together, these pressures leave very little room for error. Stable, lifelong employment has become very less common. Many households now rely on work with fluctuating hours or inconsistent pay, which creates income volatility the old emergency fund model never accounted for. In that environment, cash savings often become the only reliable bridge between uneven paydays. Healthcare is another major source of financial shock. Even with insurance, high deductibles, uncovered services, and unexpected bills can add up quickly. These events are no longer rare, and they often arrive without warning. Housing is typically the largest monthly expense, and it's also one of the least flexible. Rent and mortgage payments don't adjust downward when income falls, and missed payments can trigger serious consequences. High fixed housing costs amplify the damage of any income disruption. On top of housing, many households carry other fixed payments, such as student loans, auto loans, and credit card minimums. When income drops, these obligations remain, increasing the likelihood of missed payments and long-term financial harm. What begins as a temporary setback can quickly compound. In this context, counting months of total expenses can be misleading. Not all expenses are equally flexible, and an emergency fund is not meant to preserve an entire lifestyle. Its real job is to prevent lasting financial damage while stability is restored. A more useful approach focuses on essential expenses. Housing, utilities, insurance, basic food and transportation, and minimum debt payments form the financial foundation that must be protected. The question shifts from how long normal life can continue to how long that foundation can be kept intact. Money decisions are not purely mathematical, and uncertainty affects behavior in powerful ways. When people feel financially exposed, stress and scarcity shape how they think and the choices they make. Emergency savings play a psychological role alongside their practical function. People tend to treat money differently depending on its purpose. Emergency savings are often kept separate, even while carrying high-interest debt, because that cash represents safety and control. In an uncertain system, that sense of security can matter as much as the numbers on a spreadsheet. When economic shifts, modern risks, and human psychology are considered together, a different view of emergency savings emerges. It becomes less about being disciplined or irresponsible and more about adapting to the reality of a volatile system. In today's economy, an emergency fund functions as insulation. It absorbs shocks, reduces panic, and creates space to make thoughtful decisions instead of rushed ones. It's a practical tool for managing risk, not a measure of personal virtue. If the old rules feel inadequate or the goal feels distant, that doesn't mean progress isn't happening. Even partial savings provide real protection, and every dollar set aside increases resilience. Building a buffer is not a moral test, but a reasonable response to how the economy actually works today. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. I am not a licensed financial advisor, and this information should not replace guidance from a qualified professional.